Listen,
So,
and what have I got better to do? Come on, we're all incarcerated these days anyway.
so true.
Thank you, though. That's very sweet of you, Steph.
All
And
right. Well,
what a privilege to have been a part of Encircle at the founding. Thank you.
We needed you. Hey,
So
before you guys start interviewing him, Tom, do you want to fix my story? Just so that it is correct.
Sure. And I see lots of friends on the little pictures that I can see. So I apologize to them, each of you, for having to hear something for the 900th time. So I'll try to make it snappy. But you're right, Steph. It was after I'd been out a couple of years, and we had our challenges of trying to figure out how to make this thing work as a family. But we're having a family reunion, and they wanted me to come. My partner, fortunately, had no desire to come, but that didn't stop me from trying to push for his invitation. And boyfriend at the time, anyway. But as after the grandkids have been put to bed, we all, my four brothers, their wives, and I, and mom and dad, went to mom and dad's room and had a prayer. And then dad talked about what he thought was the importance of unity and loyalty in the family, that whatever would happen in our lives, we would be loyal as a family and united with one another. And then mom said what you said. She said, when you boys were little, I thought we had the perfect Mormon family. So life happens. I realize no family's perfect. We can be perfect, though, in our love for each other. And then she turned to my brothers and their wives and said, the most important lesson that your kids will learn from how our family treats their Uncle Tom is that nothing they can do will ever take them outside the circle of our family's love. And that was, in fact, Stephanie, you're right. That's the way that kind of the family was governed from that point on, that we were going to be loyal and united, and that no one was ever going to be outside the circle of love. So, Ken or Kayleen, do you want to start off?
Yeah, we're going to let Ken. Hi, I made it, though. I'm sorry. Our internet went blah. So,
all right.
So, welcome, everybody. We're so glad you came. And thank you.
Kayleen, I'm so glad you're back. Really, we don't want to do this without you. So, Tom, for the rest of you, Kayleen and I had the great privilege to have a little pre-meeting conversation with Tom last night, where we just talked to him a little bit and got familiar with his view. Tom, I first became aware of Tom around 2015 with the November policy statements. And from that time forward, I became aware of him, and I listened to several podcasts he was on. This was before his book came out. And some of the things that you said, Tom, and being so public about your situation were really comforting to our family, especially to my wife. She heard you speak in person. And that was an amazing thing for us. So, and also that one story you just told about your parents has stuck with us. And I think it's, you have a lot to share with us, but that's been one of the most powerful stories I've been aware of. So just to set us up a little bit for those who may not know about you, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you came to be involved in Encircle eventually, but just give us the story of who you are.
Sure, thank you. Ken, when you say you had the privilege of a conversation with Tom, it reminds me of the old joke of first prize is a week in Philadelphia and second prize is 2 weeks in Philadelphia. What a privilege that is, but in any event. I am the youngest of 5 boys in my family. Our father was a veterinarian. Most of his career, he did product research and development for veterinary pharmaceuticals. So my older brothers grew up in Utah when he was a state veterinarian, but I grew up more in New Jersey and outside of Chicago. I was about 5, I think, when I twigged that something was a little different about me than my brothers, and didn't really know what it was, but I had a sense even at that moment that it wasn't something to talk about. And then when I was in that hell called junior high school, I found out the language when some kid called me a homo, and I looked it up and discovered he was accurate. Then had language to put around what it was that made me different. in that time, you know, in some ways especially because junior high school was so painful. And I think now I would say I was bullied. I don't know. Then I just thought everybody hated it in junior high school. But for me, church was the real escape, or the one place where I felt like I could belong. And it was a haven for me. We moved after my next older brother graduated high school. We moved to a small town in central Utah where I began high school, Delta, Utah, and I had a great experience there in my high school years, and really loved it. But always, pleading that somehow the Lord would take this away, that I'd never need to tell anybody about it, that it would go away. I went on a mission, and my the bargain I was trying to strike with God was that if I would be a good missionary, He would make me straight. And I had a great mission and loved it, but when I got back, realized that hadn't happened. And then a couple years later, I thought, well, if I marry in the temple, then everything will work out. And that didn't change it either. So then I finally came to a point in my life when I was about 24, 25, and had to realize that all these prayers and fasting and bargaining hadn't changed the fact that I was gay. And this was in the era of President Kimball. And so there was no way I could see to be both gay and Mormon. So as my wife and I were separating and having the marriage annulled, I asked also to be excommunicated. And I knew that would be a cut to the heart of my parents, that this thing was so critical in their lives, that they would feel I was turning my back on it. And that was a hard time. That began that kind of the first 2 years of coming out, and the first boyfriend, and changes in my life, and having to find how we could connect with each other again, how we could communicate without being defensive or viewing that whatever anyone said was really trying to with a subtext say that what I was doing was wrong, or what they were doing was unenlightened, or whatever the case may be. But in those first couple of years, we really had to find out how we could stay involved in each other's lives, and respect the reality of each other's lives and what was critical to each one of us. And that family reunion really set the pace then for how we could go forward with me and my eventual partner being involved in everything the family did, with the exception of going to temple. And such that there was nothing that didn't include all of us, including my partner and myself. So why not use that as the background, and we can go from there.
Yeah, could you just talk a little bit more? I think it's interesting to hear how this affects a kid, really, when you finally get a word put to this, and in our culture, you start to understand what all that means. And just tell us a little bit about how this hit you and what impact that had.
Sure. It's been interesting these last couple weeks of self-isolation, that in some ways it sort of reminded me of that period when I might be with other people, but I couldn't really fully engage with them. And I wrote an editorial for the Deseret News around that BYU policy rescission and slapdown, saying, that part of my experience at BYU was really clouded by the fact that I felt I couldn't be who I was. I needed to hide who I was, and that really put a cloud over my whole experience there. And that's kind of what isolation feels like now. You may see other people, but somehow you can't fully engage. And hopefully that's not the experience with LGBT kids today, or Q, but I still think it is with our transgender brothers and sisters, that there's still so much unknown or misunderstood about their experience, that I think they have a more comparable experience to what I did, which is somehow believing at the core that if people really knew who you were, they wouldn't like you, wouldn't want to be with you, wouldn't love you.
I think that's so interesting. When I first heard your story, I was quite impressed by the time you get to be 23, 24, and you're ready to say, okay, this hasn't gone away, and this is who I am. but it takes a lot of courage, especially we're talking about 25, 30 years ago, I guess. I don't know.
35.
35. So there was something in you that gave you that courage to do this. Talk a little bit about that.
I don't know if courage is the word I would use, but at that moment it became really important to me to feel like I was being honest. I felt like I'd hidden for 25 years, or hadn't been able to fully be myself in relationships, and I just never wanted to do that again. And so for me, it was really important to just say, I don't intend to follow the policies of the church, so I'm not going to pretend that I'm a member of it. And that it doesn't. Everybody doesn't need to feel that way, but at that moment in time, that was how I felt.
Can you tell us at all about coming out to your parents and what that was like?
Yeah, it was. They were living in Colorado. I was living in California, and so I had practiced how I was going to tell them that my wife and I were separating. So the first paragraph was well practiced, but then the first question came, which was why, and somehow I hadn't practiced that answer. So I said, well, I guess because I'm gay. And there was silence on the other end of the line, and then Mom said, well, I guess we've always known. And that sort of silenced me, because I wasn't aware they'd always known. They knew I liked Broadway and musicals, but I didn't know that they knew what that meant. But we, at least even though we hadn't talked about it before, when it might have been helpful, we at least now was in the open and could speak openly to each other, and increasingly over time really share our lives completely.
And did you tell your brothers at the same time?
I actually told the brother who lived in California first. He was my trial run. And then I called Mom and Dad, and then I called each of the other brothers.
And were they all okay? Was it all good at the beginning, or did it take a while?
They were all great in terms of the initial response, but each one had their own journey to go through in this process. And at various points, I think, felt like they needed more information, or they wanted to have deeper conversations. And I think also time needed to pass for me to demonstrate that I was going to be supportive and engaged in their lives exactly as they were and what was important to them. And for at least a couple of them to feel confident in letting themselves be a part of my life.
That's great. I'm always, when I hear your story, one of the things I love so much is that while the culture and even our church culture was giving a very different message, sometimes there was a message that said, isolate your children if they're not living according to what you've taught them, and don't let them infect your other children. And your family took a very different approach. And it's quite impressive to me that they had the courage to do that. That's that courage word that I bring up again, that you may not see it as courage, but to me it feels like courage.
It reminds me of the General Conference address that Elder Uchtdorf gave a few years ago, perfect love casteth out fear. I think, either we are ruled by fear or we're ruled by love. And in that era, there was a lot to fear. There was so much that people didn't understand about being gay, and a dialogue that was current and common about this being a choice, and a wicked choice, and so there were so many things that people were given bad information for, misunderstood, and so much fear comes when we don't understand. But fortunately, they chose perfect love rather than fear.
Wow.
That's wonderful. Really wonderful. I want to go back just a little bit. When we talked to you yesterday, you said you felt really young, different. And I don't think, since I lost my connection, tell us what age you were when you felt different. And did you already answer that question? I don't think you did.
I did somewhat, just to say that when I was 5, there was
Oh,
a
okay.
sense that I just realized that I was processing differently than my brothers were.
And like, were there something different besides just that you were processing? I mean, what was different that you felt different besides, and what felt different?
I don't know at that age if I could really have described it. It just seemed like there was something that was different about me, and somebody just had a sense you weren't supposed to talk about it. And then as the junior high years came along, then I realized what it was and felt even more deeply. I didn't want to talk about it because I didn't want it to be true. I wanted to
Yeah.
believe that God could, this made me an enemy to God and he could change it so that I wasn't anymore.
Yeah. And then you said you had like one really close friend that you confided in, or did you have a group of people, or did you just kind of stay completely in the closet?
No, there was one friend in high school that I confessed mainly because I thought he was gay too. And I still think he is, but he is married to a woman and has children. But anyway, and hope he's not watching this. Anyway, but it was at least something where it was a relief to have somebody I could say something to, but it wasn't a complete relief because it wasn't something I could share or feel that somebody else really understood.
And did he keep your secret, and did he support you through the years until you came out?
He did. The thing is, he was a senior when I was a freshman, so we only overlapped for a year, and then he went off to college. So, but he was great in that regard.
Well, good. And do you keep in contact with him now, or have you lost?
Boy, I don't want to give too much away here, but
I'm just curious because he's your one contact.
Right. We have connected over time. Yeah.
You have connected over time. That's great. Ken, what else?
Well, I'm very interested in so many people in this situation, and even as parents, we get to this point where we're so conflicted between the church that we love so much and our child. And for us as parents who have been blessed with queer children, it's a very different feeling than being LGBTQ yourself. So, but it is a very strong, a harsh conflict that many of us deal with. And but your parents were able to somehow bridge that, and I'd like to hear a little bit about that, because I think maybe it could help us to hear how your parents came to where they got to be.
And it's something that I wrote in that book. I wish that they could have written the book. They could put light on so many things that I didn't know of their own experience. So I don't know that I know everything about exactly how they got to that point. I know they made it a matter of constant prayer. They sought revelation for their stewardship over their family, and I felt they received it based on kind of how we proceeded. My sense is that the answer they got was erect no barriers to love. Not to put any impediments in the way of me engaging with the family or feeling the love of the family. And that was certainly the best course for me. I'm a snotty enough kid that if they had said, well, it's our way or the highway, I would have said sayonara, And so I'm grateful for that. I felt like that was certainly the right answer for us. People often say to me, your parents were so far ahead of their time back then to do that. And I think the idea is where I feel like they were ahead of their time was that they were unwilling to choose between the two things that they believed were true, that they couldn't fully reconcile. Faith and family, they weren't going to choose. So they really, and we talked about this many times, they felt like they had no complete understanding of how this was all going to play out over eternity, and therefore didn't know all the answers that they wanted to have. But they felt that, that their faith gave meaning to their family, and their family gave meaning to their faith, and they weren't willing to let go of either one.
Could I respond?
Yes.
This
Bill,
is Bill.
Hi, Bill.
Uh, on Sunday, Jeff Holland, in his remarks, spoke in its first half about the needs, religious needs early in the 19th century. And in the last half, he spoke a little bit about the future. And in one impressive line that I won't be able to quote, but I hope I can capture, he said he hoped for the day when every one of God's children, regardless of their situation, would be accepted and blessed. Today, I had a extended conversation with a person whom I love who served as a missionary when I was residing in Hong Kong. He lives in California. He's a spectacular pediatrician. He's been a bishop and a stake president, and he talked to me today about his daughter, BYU graduate, married at 18, mother of 3, who's come out as lesbian to her husband and family. And my missionary brother and his family and all the siblings are accepting and loving and have done, I think, toward this girl what Tom's parents have done. But what I want to comment about is that in spite of family love and acceptance, the remarks of Elder Holland did not include gay and lesbian people. I wanted it to. I wanted there to be an acknowledgement that these wonderful children of our Heavenly Father are among those who need complete acceptance. And while my missionary and his family accept their child and love and do, I think, as the Savior would have prompted them to do, there is still the heartache and the gap because of the inability to be reconciled with their religious faith.
Yeah, there's no doubt that that's something that we all have to face. And somehow Tom's parents were able to see it quite simply. But for many of us, it's not that simple. It feels very complicated and very painful. I once had a conversation with a woman in my ward who, she's 84 years old and she has a trans granddaughter. And she was sitting at my dining room table and I said, tell me about having a trans granddaughter. What's that like for you? And she said the most beautiful thing. She said, you can leave the church, but you cannot leave my family. And she had tapped into something very similar to what Tom's parents seem to have tapped into. But Bill, I appreciate this comment that you made, because it is very, very difficult and very painful, and we all have to figure it out in our own way.
May I jump in on that for a moment?
Please.
I often get asked the question at firesides or whatever, did you feel bitter that you felt you had to leave the church? And my answer is no, I didn't, because I felt like I was following the path that seemed best to me and heading in a direction that I thought was going to be useful to me. I said, or I say, bitter only came after a couple of coming back to church, a couple of policies and a couple of general conference addresses. and I had a period toward the end of last year after October conference that was a pretty low for me. And for me, the answer that has come is a feeling of to pray for the spiritual gift of hope, and not hope in the sense of optimism or hope in a particular outcome, a revelation, whatever change that may be, but really hope in Christ. And that, as I continue to pray for that, that's really helped me to feel that that I'm centered where I need to be. That leaders of the church and other people, God bless them, are doing the best they can, and I'm doing the best I can, but my focus is on Christ.
I think that's important. I wanted to get to this too, is you asked to be excommunicated, but it's not like suddenly you've forgotten everything that you've ever known or felt, and you're not participating in the church, but you're still Tom Christofferson, and you've grown up in a spiritual environment and you've had spiritual experiences. Those certainly didn't leave you the minute you left the church. How did you maintain a spiritual life, or did you feel like you needed to, or can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think one critical thing I always want to get across is that I never asked to leave the church because I didn't believe in Christ or the Book of Mormon is a testament of Christ. I asked to leave because I couldn't see any place for myself there. So for me, and this is just me and my own personal experience, it's not so much that my beliefs changed, it's that I needed a different outlet for them. And so I was on an extended absence without leave or something, I don't know, for 20 some odd years. But I felt that I had a spiritual life. I wanted it at a certain point. I wanted it to be richer and deeper than it was, but I never felt like I lost my connection to Christ or Heavenly Parents, and I never felt like they stopped wanting to connect with me.
Good. I love hearing that. It's been a constant theme with people that we've talked to, is learning to separate spirituality from our religion and our church involvement. And we think they're entwined and they're the same thing, but I think what you're saying is they're really not.
I think I would say, in my experience, I find opportunities to serve and things about activity in the church that feed my soul. And I also periodically attend my local Episcopal congregation because I find things that feed my soul there. And I sort of say, I go to the church I believe, and I go to the church that believes me. Unfortunately, they're not the same one. But I think we each find ways to feed our souls and outlets for service and ways to feel like we're doing something that helps us be in place, act as the Lord's hands among His children in this world. And for me at this point, that one of the ways I feel that is my engagement with the church.
That's wonderful.
I think one of the best things, or one of the things that has touched me most about your story is your willingness to be so open-hearted and so just non-judgmental, even to those that, and a system that has hurt you. And this is kind of reflected in this way where you came back to church. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like and what prompted that? And I think there's a lot to be learned from how they treated you.
Yeah, I happily, and I'm looking at the clock thinking, well, gosh, anybody who's listening or watching hasn't had a chance to participate. So how about if we make this our last general question and then see what
Absolutely.
I'm talk
Yeah.
about. But after I'd been away from the church about 25 years, my partner and I had moved to a small town in southern Connecticut. I was working in the city, and he was had just finished medical school and was starting his internship and residency at a hospital there in Stamford, Connecticut. And so we had moved to this little town to be closer to the hospital. I didn't want him to be driving late at night when he was half asleep. But I knew there was an LDS church there. And I started to attend, and I would just sneak into sacrament meeting a few minutes after it started and leave the minute it was over, so I didn't have to talk to anyone. But eventually asked to speak to the bishop, and he invited me to his home, and I said to him, look, here's the scoop. My partner and I have been together for 12 years. I've made commitments to him that I think would preclude me making any covenants. So I'm not coming to you telling you I want to join the church. What I'm saying is I've been in your ward and felt a spiritual feeling of a feeling of a congregation that desires to know and serve Christ, and I'd like to be part of that. But now that you know me and who I am I welcome? And his instant answer was, yes, please come and bring your partner with you. We want to know both of you. And that was the welcome I felt. For the first year, I only went to sacrament meetings. I only knew the bishopric. And then the bishop said, the rest of us have stamina for 3 hours. You probably do too. Why don't you start hanging out the rest of the time? And that's when I began to know other people in the ward and found them to be just incredibly loving. And, the information circles in Mormondom are pretty efficient. So I never doubted that, that the story had gotten out about who I was. And people were great. They would invite both my partner and myself over to their home with their young kids to dinner to get to know us better, a genuine desire to be friends, and other kind of social activities or service projects. And I just, always felt like people would rightly have assumed I was not living all the commandments. And yet the feeling I had when I walked through that chapel door, hundreds of times, was that they were delighted to see me and happy to welcome me and eager to have me sit with them.
That's so beautiful. And how long were you with your partner?
At the 19 years.
19 years. And then did you move back to Utah or?
We, so I took early retirement from JP Morgan and we sold our home in Connecticut. And the plan was that I was going to get a place in California, and once he finished the contract he had, he would join. But as that was kind of coming to a pass, and I had been baptized 6 months earlier, he said, this is just really not working for me, and I think we should separate for a while and see how that works. And that eventually became permanent, and he now has a new partner of the last 2-3 years and is very happy.
And you're living,
I'm now living in Arizona, and you can't see, but I'm wearing shorts. It's
That's great. I'm in pajamas, so I think let's try to go ahead and open it up for question and answers.